I do want to begin with the question raised by two geniuses, namely Donny Hathaway and Roberta Flack. Where is the love? Because you see, you can't talk about justice without talking about love. Reinhold Niebuhr put it so very well. Anybody who talks about justice and remains locked solely into talk about justice soon finds themselves degenerating into something less than justice. Justice can only be rescued by love. It could be love of wisdom, it could be love of learning, love of knowledge, love of neighbor. And I'm a Christian, I believe in love of enemies, but don't try that one on your own. You need a whole lot of grace for that one. But we're talking about deep love. And that's why, in fact, I want to begin on a Socratic note. Because when we turn to line 38a of Plato's Apology, the unexamined life is not worth living. Malcolm X says the examined life is painful. The question is, how deep is your love of wisdom to muster the courage to examine yourself, your society, your world? And we're living in a moment in which there's such relative paucity of courage. Everybody wants to be smart, like smartphones. But who wants to be courageous and wise, like Fannie Lou Hamer, like Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, like Dorothy Day, that cut radically against the grain and shatter all forms of narrow, insensitive conformity and complacency and downright cowardice. So anytime we talk about justice, we ought to shiver, we ought to shudder like Faust in the realm of Mothers and Goethe's great classic. Why? Because when you're talking about justice, you're raising the most fundamental questions about what it means to be human. We know the Greek actually says the unexamined life is not a life for the human. In our English word human derives from the Latin humando. And humando means what? Burying. That we're finite beings toward death. And even death is too abstract. We're finite beings toward being corpses. And if that doesn't begin to raise certain existential anxieties, nothing will. That's what I love about professors of the humanities. They're dealing with the burial voices of the dead, those who have passed on. And the talk about justice, especially as it relates to education, is to begin wrestling with forms of death. That's why Plato says philosophy, love of wisdom, is a meditation on and preparation for death. Not just physical death, psychic death, spiritual death, social death, civic death. Who has the courage to straighten their backs up and say, I am willing to engage in Socratic questioning, critical scrutiny of myself in my short move from womb to tomb? That's one reason why I spend so much time with the funk masters like George Clinton and Bootsy Collins. Because they remind us we all emerge in the funk of our mama's wombs. And it's bloody down there. It's a little stinky down there too. But that's where the love is, because it's a love push that gets us out. I don't know about you, but I know I am who I am because somebody loved me. Somebody cared for me. Somebody attended to me. Push aside all the academic honors. My highest honor is being the second son of Irene and the late Clifton West. Being the brother of Clifton and the brother of Cynthia and Cheryl. Being the father of Clifton and Zaytoon. Why? Because that's love at its most concrete level. And tonight here at LaSalle, we are going to resist all forms of deodorized discourse. We want to keep it funky. We want to stay on the ground where the blood is, where the tears are, where the suffering is, where the wounds and scars and bruises are, as human beings, not victims, but human beings dealing with systems of victimization, but victimization never having the last word. That's where we begin. And the question, especially for the young brothers and sisters of all colors here at this institution, is first drawing a radical distinction between what the Greeks call paideia, P-A-I-D-E-I-A, deep education, as opposed to cheap schooling. There's a fundamental difference. You don't come to LaSalle given the rich tradition here just to gain access to a skill so you can get a job and live in some vanilla suburb. I want you to have a job, especially given this massive unemployment against this neoliberal capitalist regime, where so much of the money is hemorrhaged at the top, and the wages are stagnating, and the jobs are unavailable, and the jobs that are available, often low wage, yes, but it's not just a question of a job. The question is, what kind of human being are you going to choose to be? Yeah, those are the questions that Du Bois raised, responding to Socrates' challenge of critically examine who we are. Du Bois was 89 years old when he raised this question. He had been through hell and high water and given the vicious legacy of white supremacy and class privilege and imperial powers from 1868 to 1957. 89 years, 6 years after he emerged from a court with his hands cuffed, charged as working on behalf of a foreign government, he said, no, I'm just trying to be true to the struggle for truth, and the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. I want to be true to unconditional love, and yes, it's true. Justice is what love looks like in public, just like tenderness is what love feels like in private. And Du Bois says what? I got 4 questions. The first one, how does integrity face oppression? Not denying the oppression, but how do I preserve my integrity in the face of this darkness, this bleakness, these mechanisms of denial in American culture that somehow lose sight of the humanity of so many folk, beginning with our oppression as indigenous brothers and sisters. 1492, World War I began against our indigenous brothers and sisters in 1492, been going on ever since. So invisible in our public discourse. Red brothers and sisters, indigenous brothers and sisters don't have to be in the room for us to acknowledge the suffering that they've undergone and the resistance that they have put forward. Let's give us ovation for the indigenous brothers and sisters and all the hell that they have caught and our refusal to come to terms with it. How does integrity face oppression? Second, what does honesty do in the face of deception? How do you attempt to be an honest human being in the short time that you're here? Oh, that has revolutionary implications, because we live in a society with monstrous mentality, lies after lies after lies. Not just extreme economic inequality, but also pervasive criminality. And not just on the block, but in high places. How many Wall Street executives has gone to jail given the large amounts of crimes committed in 2008? Not one. But let Jamal or Letitia get caught with a crack bag on the corner, going to jail for 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, 9 years. What kind of criminal justice system do we have? Class biased, racist in that sense. Let's be honest about it. That's the second question of Du Bois. The third question, what does decency do in the face of insult? Not just personal insult, but structural insult. Have you looked at the closing of schools in Philadelphia lately? Have you looked at the privatizing of public education lately? Indecent often. Have you looked at the security measures of our precious young folk when they enter school? Coming out of hoods, bullets are flying, highly available, more available than quality jobs or quality education. Well, the drugs are highly available, coming from the outside. And when they arrive, what do they see, Brother Ernest Miller? You know. Curriculum with no arts programs. And we wonder why the hip-hop artists can't play instruments like the Ohio Players or watch the 103rd Street Rhythm Band. or the Philadelphia sound with the Gamble Huff genius generating the orchestrations. But the genius is still there, but no, it's going to be oral now, with the sampling of the James Browns and George Clintons and others. Nothing to pique their imagination, nothing to expand their critical intelligence. And of course, we know in America, rich kids get taught, poor kids get tested. Qualitative difference. Qualitative difference. Thank God Salle is around to say, come whosoever willing to work hard, defer gratification, be disciplined, spend time in the laboratory, spend time in the library, and find yourself undergoing that paideia, that deep education, that formation of attention to get us to shift from superficial things to substantial things, to get us to come to terms with relevant subject matter. And by relevant, I'm not just talking about something contemporary and political. I'm talking about something human and existential. What will equip you when you have to come to terms with catastrophe and crisis in your own life? Will you be ready? Will you be prepared intellectually, spiritually, morally, politically, economically? That's what the paideia is fundamentally about. And you see, for Du Bois, stress on integrity, honesty, decency, and then the last question, how does virtue meet brute force? How can you preserve any sense of virtue in the face of being terrorized? And of course, there's a whole lot of talk about terrorism in the last 13 years. We know anytime an innocent human being of whatever color, no matter what culture, civilization, or sexual orientation is killed, that's a crime against humanity.
That's right.
But oh, lo and behold, a precious child is killed by a U.S. drone in Somalia or Yemen or Pakistan. We don't have too much to say. But that precious child has the same status as a precious white child in Newtown, Connecticut, as a precious brown child in East Los Angeles, a precious red child in Wisconsin, a precious black child right here on the north side of Philadelphia. And it sounds simple, but it's a matter of trying to be morally consistent, or what Jane Austen called constancy. Can we actually be morally consistent in such a way that we no longer are blinded by such narrow lens? How broad is the scope of one's empathy, one's sensitivity? And that's in part what wrestling with forms of death is all about. Section 20 of Book 1 of the great Montaigne's collection of essays. He says, to philosophize is to learn how to die. And I tell my students each time they come to my course, Brother Tony, they're sitting there, it's a beautiful sight to see the sparkling in their eyes. I said, you come to my class to learn how to die. Well, am I in the right class or what? Thought I was trying to get an A or B. No, that's not what this class is about.